Hey everyone, it's LS, and this is the patch 10.7 notes rundown. It does seem like actually the patch has quite a few changes, so we're just going to get into the nitty gritty of it because some of these changes can potentially be meta warping, and that would be interesting. And then obviously, at the very end of the patch, we're going to get to the most important things, which are the skins. We definitely have some really nice ones here. The Scion skin actually looks like Thanos, but like the Tristana skin and then the Vigar skin just really takes the cake. Not really going to talk about Worldbreaker Malzahar. It looks like some villain out of like Dragon Ball Z that dies first in the episode. And then obviously Worldbreaker Maokai. I really don't know what to think of him, but maybe I'll think a little bit differently in the next splash art. And Urgot looks like the thing of horror stories when you were a child and your parents ordered a clown to the birthday party, and the clown was just not really something was just not quite right. Okay, something was not quite right, and the clown was scary for all the wrong reasons. Because honestly, I'm not looking forward to seeing the full splash art, but this is totally fine. Okay, here we go. Let's get into it. Champions, Fiddlesticks, the Ancient Fear. Spooky Scarecrow is ripping out brains in 10.7 now with 100% more Oogie and Boogie. So Fiddlesticks looks really cool from everything that I saw of him. I didn't personally actually get to go on the PBE and play him because I was having issues actually connecting when trying to connect to the PBE a couple of days ago. So unfortunately, I did not get to really like playtest him or have any hands-on experience. But he does look really fun. He looks very control-y in nature. Obviously, we're not going to see him debut in pro play because I believe that Riot released a statement that like Wukong is disabled throughout playoffs in all of the major regions, and if that's the case, then it probably means that Fiddlesticks is not going to show, which means that we have to wait probably 2 months or something until Summer Split would end up starting. 2.5 months, who really knows, the dates aren't all set, and that will be when we end up seeing Fiddlesticks. In terms of solo queue, I imagine that he is going to be really strong because from everything that I've seen, he has obviously a lot of control because of his effigies. His clear speed seems to be really fast, and because of the way that he can clear, I think that it covers up a lot of weaknesses that the old Fiddlesticks had. So that is pretty much it. Okay, Akali, our cooldown decreased. Our perfect execution, 120 to 60 second scaling to 100 to 60 seconds. So this doesn't really change any of Akali's super early game weaknesses. All that it means is that she can obviously cast it off cooldown the second time a lot sooner, which is, I guess, noticeable because Akali will be looking for lethal. But overall, I think this is a totally fine balance to Akali that isn't going to change her current standing inside of the meta at all. I don't doubt that this could potentially bump her win rate because there's a chance that it comes off cooldown and she gets a kill inside of solo queue over the span or over a very large sample size. And in that regard, probably will nudge her win rate in that regard ever so slightly. But in competitive, this isn't going to do anything. Corki, W direct hit burn duration increase. W special delivery, direct burn duration 1.5 to 2 seconds. This is a complete placebo buff that's just on here. It's not going to end up doing anything, I would imagine, for either solo queue or competitive. Maybe Corki's win rate bumps super slight. I actually always find those lol patch by the numbers analysis things super interesting that end up getting posted on Reddit, but realistically, this is a complete luxury buff. You don't always have special delivery, and it's not like it's going to be all that meaningful. Galio, R now grants a magic damage shield to all allies in the area. R Hero's Entrance now grants E Shield of Duran's passive magic damage to all allied champions in the area he casted it at for 5 seconds. So, one of the things is that this is really interesting, mostly on red side. However, the way that the meta is right now, there's a lot of physical damage champions inside of the jungle and in top lane. And so, unless the meta ends up coming back to something like AP junglers getting more prominent, or enchanter or mage supports coming in a lot more, or AD carries that also deal magic damage, or off-tanky mages that are also sort of like bruiser assassin thingy. So obviously, like champions like Diana, or just mages that end up diving in and doing something of value. So obviously Galio used to be really good against Akali, for instance. He used to be really good. This is really nice for Galio support, but for Galio mid lane, and in terms of like putting him in the mid lane, it obviously functions both ways. However, stars have to really align for you to really want Galio to be in mid lane. But no matter what, this is an absolutely insane buff that can definitely be very valuable in competitive on red side as a counter pick, where Galio slots in very nicely against an enemy team composition that has a lot of magic damage. So in that regard, I think that it's really, really nice. So Garen, passive cooldown increased, Q movement speed duration decreased early, scales more later. Armor of Vanguard soldiered through 10.6 nerfs and continue to overperform, especially in the mid lane. Take another stab at him by lowering his early utility. Cooldown 7 to 8 seconds on his passive Perseverance, and Q decisive strike movement speed 1.5 to 3.5 seconds changed to 1 to 3.6 seconds. So ultimately, this doesn't end up doing anything. The thing is that Garen ends up maxing this first. So all things considered, I mean, he has 0.2 seconds missing on his Q, which just means that if you're wiggling correctly anyway, it probably doesn't mean all that much. I don't doubt that this will nudge his win rate, but all that it ends up doing is it mostly affects him up until level 5. So you're looking at level 4, he suffers a little bit. So between level 1 and 4 is where Garen, I guess, gets hit the most by this change, but this isn't. This doesn't end up doing anything. And apparently Twitch chat is informing me that this actually does a lot more, because Garen doesn't max Q. And I'm not gonna cut the tape, okay? We're gonna completely just keep this inside of this patch note rundown. And that's totally fine, not a big deal. Coach, content creator, caster here, and sometimes we get things we completely blank on something. So in that regard, having half a second off, I think it's a little bit more than just a wiggling thing. His positioning just will have to be better. Like a wiggle, I'm referring to something like 50 range, as long as you're on point with 50 range or something. But now Garen is just going to have to be a little bit more precise with his positioning when going for Q activations. So it's not the end of the world. It's still only half a second. But I guess that is a lot more noticeable than what I was originally thinking, and that's fine. Garen, obviously in competitive, isn't really being picked anywhere inside of solo queue. Again, this probably I agree that it would affect mid lane more than it would. Or actually, sorry. I don't think that this will actually affect mid lane more than I think that it would affect top lane, just because of the duration and the lengthiness of the lane. So not totally sure on that one, but not the end of the world. Ivern, E-base damage increased, R cooldown decreased. Ivern got the short end of the stick with some of the more recent jungle change systems, and we're not brushing that off. We're attempting to give him back that power and then some. E, Trigger Seed, 60 to 140 to 70 to 170, and this is his first max. So normally Ivern doesn't start showing his head until level 4 anyway, so we're mostly looking at the second point, where the first point doesn't really matter. So we're looking at actually a 15 damage buff, and then eventually this ends up going up to 20, and then obviously scales very well. And I think this is really, really good, because if people remember when I was talking about a lot of the Ivern changes, Ivern's in a very interesting spot where his items come online a lot sooner. The meta is also shaping up to where Ivern can potentially come back, where we're starting to see some more hyper AD carries come into the mix. Obviously, we've seen Kog'Maw now a few times. We've seen Vayne come out once. We're seeing Caitlyn start to pop up a lot more. And with MF, Aphelios, and Senna constantly getting hit down and whatnot, with Sejuani coming back into the jungle, with other sort of like mid-rangey junglers starting to pop up more, Ivern ends up becoming really valuable at controlling all of them. You also have buffs to a lot of the Blade of the Ruin King users, and Ivern slots in really nice. And one of the things that Ivern was always missing was just a little bit of damage. And so in this regard, the Trigger Seed buff, it's not over the top, it's 30 damage, but he'll cast this several times inside of a team fight, and then when you figure all of his items and how he interacts, plus the fact that he has Spellbook inside of the jungle, this is really nice. Do I think that it's going to mean that people just instantly start picking Ivern? No, I don't think so. I think it's really cool, though. Daisy cooldown, 160 to 120 seconds to 140 to 120 seconds. This is big as well, because Ivern, whenever he has Daisy, he can actively look to dive. Daisy is insane at setting up plays, insane at diving, insane at initially tanking aggro, or even allowing opponents to get in position to take the aggro first, depending on like how you're trying to set it up, perhaps down in bot lane or something. So the cooldown reduction on Daisy is really big because she is one of the ultimates in the game that you can actively look to cast off cooldown depending on what's going on. Kaisa E cooldown decreased later. Supercharge, Superfly, and we're giving Kaisa more opportunities for late game outplaying while also maintaining her takedown potential. E supercharge 16 seconds to 14 seconds to 16 seconds to 12 seconds. This isn't the biggest change in the world. It is going to be noticeable, especially because Kaisa does end up getting CDR inside of her itemization. So Riot really does seem like they're pushing Kaisa. Obviously, these changes won't be seen inside of pro play, and in solo queue, it doesn't matter all that much. I think that Kaisa is in a really bad spot as it actually is. I disagree with her resurgence in pro play. I don't think that she deserves to be getting picked as much as she is in some regions. I think that a lot of people misunderstand when she ends up being really good. She's an answer to team compositions. She's not a standalone AD carry in her current state, nor do I think that her current state allows her to just be picked regardless of what's going on. And what I mean by that is when I'm referring to a standalone AD carry, I'm talking about one that can just be blind picked. When I'm talking about one that can just be picked regardless or come into sort of anything, it's sort of like if you don't feel like really picking something else, or if something else doesn't really matter, then you can just go with Kaisa. I don't think that she's there. I think there's a lot of other better AD carries, and I don't think that this kind of a change is going to really do anything of size for that. So that's pretty much it. Nasus. W target range increase, E target armor reduction ratio increase. We wanted to increase Nasus's utility since that's the quality that more experienced players value and can capitalize on. And I totally agree with that. W wither 600 to 700 is really big on the range. That actually helps him with setting up ganks. It helps him with dogging people down that are trying to escape from him. No pun intended. E Spirit Fire armor reduction 15 to 35 to 25 to 45%. So even just having this at rank 1 is an extra 10% on the reduction, which is now sort of, depending on like the matchup and what the enemy is itemizing, can actually take away, I guess, one of the runes that they end up selecting whenever the Spirit Fire is on them. So Nasus is actually really good in the meta right now, in both competitive and even in solo queue, as an answer to certain champions, but he also slots in really good. I think a lot of people think of Nasus as a late game carry, but I don't think Nasus is a late game carry. I think Nasus is a very beefy mid game champion that really spikes in terms of his oppressiveness in mid game. Because before the AD carries and the mid laners start to get their utility items, that's where Nasus is most obnoxious. He's most obnoxious when his Wither completely morphs mid-game team fights, when it completely shuts down opponents in mid-game from being able to transition into anything, and when his Q stacks are already oppressive enough due to the size of their damage. There's not really a whole bunch of difference between 400 stack on his Q versus 600, which takes him obviously a later stage to get to, because he's probably still killing you in the same amount of rotations on his Q, or just the way that he's going to end up team fighting. Even though the damage number is pretty big, it's not what's really making Nasus oppressive inside of the team fights. So I think he's already really good. Hopefully this does bump his play activity, and I can see this actually affecting his win rate. So I really like the change. Nocturne, base health region and magic resistance growth decreased 8.5 to 7. Magic resistance growth 1.25 to 0.75. So that's really big in mid lane, where Nocturnes can sort of cheat waves in a manner that not even like Talon or Kiana can do, and he can also do it safely in mid lane. This is obviously targeted at solo queue. We're not really seeing Nocturne in competitive, and so in that regard, I think it's a totally fine balance change. This isn't really affecting his jungle whatsoever. It is just affecting his ability to try to play an econ game against mid lane mages and then outroam them and completely out-tempo them. Riven, base health and health region increased. Base health is up by, less than 5, and health region is up by 1.5. I think this is totally fine. I like that they're trying to give Riven back more power. I remember when the whole Riven debate was out in terms of nerfing Riven because she was so dominant in North America and then also Europe, I believe, but she wasn't really seen at all in Asian ladders like Ionia or Korea. That do you really just balance because of one region's inability to handle a champion? I think that she's actually not super good. I think Riven is good. Okay, let me clarify. I think Riven is competitively viable, and I think that she is good. I think the skills necessary in order to make her competitively viable is actually a very, very high ask. I would liken Riven to playing Vel'Koz in mid lane, or playing Xerath in mid lane, or something like that. I would liken her to the really complex mages that require a lot of unique skill and dedication in order to make them effective. And in that regard, it's really hard to see champions like this come out regularly and shine. And even when they do, there's still reasons that they're not able to be picked up by more people. I think in some spots, Riven is already really good and strong, but I do think that because, unlike Xerath or Vel'Koz or champions like that, that they have their long range, they have their control-y features, they have just the way that they're able to conduct themselves, Riven has to be very hands-on and she has to grapple. And so there's a higher ask on her, and it also allows for a lot more counterplay, where she doesn't have, interestingly enough, as much forgiveness if the enemy is actually playing a lot safer, and she's easier to draft around than maybe champions that are mages that are of a similar tree. So in that regard, I would actually like to see Riven get more help, but I do acknowledge that she is really strong. Talon. W initial base damage decreased, return base damage decreased, damage ratio decreased, rake initial damage 50 to 110, plus 0.4 bonus attack damage to 45 to 105, plus 0.4 bonus attack damage, return damage 70 to 130, plus 0.6 bonus 80 to 45 to 125, plus 0.7. Oh my god, are you just gone? Wow, he got smacked in the early game. So obviously this really affects solo queue, but now this makes it so that he has a much higher reliance on getting to Tiamat. And even when he does end up getting to Tiamat, he's still being hit. There's no way around it. He's still being hit. I think this is a very interesting balance change because they didn't try to shift around any of his power. They just outright actually kneecapped him in a way. But I still think that he'll probably be able to be playable inside of solo queue, but he's going to need changes, or he's going to need balance shifting in order to have him be competitively viable. Wukong. Passive bonus armor decreased later, E base damage decreased later, now allows W and R to be queued up during its dash. Passive Stone Skin. 5 to 11 to 5 to 9 at levels 1 to 18. And E Nimbus Strike. 80 to 240 to 80 to 200. E Wukong ability queue. W and Warrior Trickster R Cyclone can now be queued up during his dash. I think these are totally fine balanced nerfs. I like that they're not extremely over the top or anything. And I think these are actually really nice. I think Riot's being very reserved here. And I wonder why that is, especially because we're about to enter into off-season, and this patch isn't one that is going to stick. So I would actually imagine that we would have more chaotic experimentation rather than just cautiousness here. Xin Zhao passive base health increased later. We wanted to spruce up Warrior of Demacia by upping his ability, his durability and endurance through difficult fights. Okay. Base heal 10 to 76 to 10 to 112. So this is nice as well. I mean, it's not, again, over the top. So a lot of these nerfs are very, very light, except for the Talon one, and a lot of the buffs are very light. So even though there's a lot of placebo going on inside of this patch, they're being really reserved, and when we already got one really big present in the patch, which is Fiddlesticks, and we also have, like, the change to Ivern, we have the change to Nasus, I think this patch is actually shaping up to be really good right now. Runes conditioning activation time increased. Activation time 10 to 12 seconds on conditioning. That's really brutal. But obviously, in spots where you just don't value second wind or bone plating, it's still going to be completely fine. You're not really concerned with it. Especially because mid-game teamfights don't usually start breaking out until like anywhere between 13 to like 16 minutes on average. So I think that this rune still comes online before then. This is still definitely occurring inside of the laning phase. Phase Rush. Movement speed for melee champions increased. Phase Rush remains suboptimal on melee champions, even for those who have traditionally opted into this kind of keystone. Movement speed 30 for 50% on melee champions to 40 to 60% on melee champions. So I like that they're trying to give more love back to Phase Rush. And this is obviously very noticeable because it's basically boots tier 1. that ends up scaling to more than boots tier 1. It goes into boots tier 2 at way later stages of the game. So it's actually a really big buff that can't be understated. One for all balance changes, not going to look at those. ARAM, free-to-play rotation, and balance changes. This is really good. I'm currently leveling my accounts on Korea. Bug fixes, make it rain. Okay. Oh, this is really big. Because again, playing ARAM. But it looks like now we are going to the skin section. So let's just recap really quickly. And I'll basically just say what I think about competitive and solo queue. I think Fiddlesticks has the ability to be both in solo queue and competitive. I think out the gate, he should be good in solo queue, unless something has happened to his numbers between now and when I last looked at him. I think he's actually going to be really good, especially because AP junglers have been hurting a little bit. There's basically Gragas. I know people would say there's Elise. I'm not going to say there's Elise. There's Gragas, there's Karthus, there's Evelyn, there's Talia. I mean, there's a couple of mage junglers, but Fiddlesticks actually really has a unique spin on it because of his FGs and stuff. So I think the Fiddlesticks is really good. Akali doesn't really do anything for competitive, does affect solo queue in the slightest, but you shouldn't be playing Akali in solo queue anyway. Corki doesn't really affect anything. Galio situationally affects a lot, I think, on red side in competitive. Inside of solo queue, I guess it could have a little bit more prevalence, but why are you playing Galio inside of solo queue? Garen, I don't think that it really does anything. I think that actually the Q Decisive Strike affects top lane more than mid lane, and again, Garen's already not being played in competitive. Ivern change, I think, is really, really big for both solo queue and competitive. I don't know if that will necessarily mean that pro players start playing Ivern, but again, we have to wait a couple of months until we end up seeing this come to fruition, and who knows what's going to happen with the mid-season patch. Kaisa change doesn't really matter. Nasus, I think, is a champion that people actually should be giving a lot more credit, both in solo queue and in competitive. And if you don't know about the Nasus that runs Spellbook with Heal and Ghost and Nimbus Cloaks, I think that that is absolutely the way to go on Nasus. And you should look up that Nasus One Trick Pony. I believe that he plays on Korea, and you should try to find information about him. Nocturne. I think it's obviously only for solo queue, doesn't really matter. Riven, I think, needs another buffs. Talon, I actually love the nerf because I think that Talon needs to get his power shifted around. Wukong doesn't really do anything. It does something, but it doesn't really do anything. If you're going to be picking Wukong, this isn't going to make you stop picking Wukong. Xin Zhao, I like that it's a little nudge in the right direction, so that doesn't really matter either. Phase Rush and Conditioning. Conditioning 10 to 12 minutes, again, doesn't really do all that much. Obviously, this can affect some of the first item completions, and that can affect some of the trades on first item completions for some champions, and it can actually stifle some of the early game acceleration if a champion ends up getting really far ahead, but that's pretty much it. Phase Rush, very big buff in the later stages of the game for any of the melee Phase Rush champions, and even early on. All right, let's get into the skins. Okay. So let's take a look at the skins. Okay, so the Veigar skin is quite possibly one of the cutest skins to ever come out in League of Legends, and honestly, if I could give him a hug, I absolutely would. It's too cute. There's actually no better skin probably now on Veigar, and it's adorable, so just throwing that out there. You can make sure to get this in your shop once your client updates to 10.7, personally, I would really recommend it. And now we go, yeah, this is actually the stuff of horror stories. And if I was this person over here, I would probably not want to come in. This is more frightening than Urgot's base skin. This is really more frightening than Urgot's base skin. Yeah, I don't know what to say. Okay, so the Malzahar skin here looks really weird. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it really looks like Dr. Doom or something. Just, he got into his mother's makeup palette or something. I don't know what is really going on here, but this is honestly just looking very strange. Okay, Dr. Doom he's really trying to give himself a makeover, and it looks like he did his makeup in the dark. That is all that I'm going to say here. It's not giving me the best vibes, okay? He looks like he would die first in a Marvel movie. So, this looks like Thanos. This is actually the coolest skin I think Sion has now. I love the splash art. I think that it looks really cool. If I was a Sion player, I'd probably go and get the skin. just because it looks really nice. Now that it might look nice in game. Obviously, there are a lot of tricky skins that splash art's really cool, and then in game it looks really scary. So I don't know. Okay, and then the Maokai skin. The Maokai skin doesn't look that bad. This looks like I can't remember if it's Crash Bandicoot or something. Like you guys know like the jungle juice like hut thingy majiggies. I don't know if you're still playing Meowkai, okay? There's no reason not to play Meowkai. All right, so get the Vigar skin, get the Thanos skin, and if you really hate your opponents, get the Urgot skin. And that is it for patch 10.7. And if you're looking for other ways that you can maybe up your solo queue ability, patreon.com/LSXYZ9 for the patch 10.7 solo queue and Clash tier list. Absolutely fantastic. And we'll see what happens, obviously, in the meta, as playoffs are starting soon in every single region. And that's it.